The cafe on Waypoint 17 smelled like burnt synth coffee and broken promises, which suited Brino Dunn just fine. He had made a career out of both. Rain streaked the viewport beside his usual booth, the kind of manufactured precipitation the station's atmospheric processors pumped out every third cycle to keep the air from tasting like the inside of a cargo container. Through the water-blurred glass, he could see the docking rings spinning lazily against the amber glow of the gas giant that dominated this sector's sky. Crellis Minor, the locals called it. Breno called it that big orange bastard because he had once clipped a fuel skimmer on its third moon and spent 9 hours drifting before anyone bothered to tow him in. That was 17 years ago. He had been younger then, stupider, more willing to believe that the universe had a plan that included him in some meaningful way. Now he was 53. His knees ached when the station's gravity fluctuated, and the only plan he had was to drink his coffee, eat whatever the food printer decided to call eggs today, and avoid conversations with anyone who might remind him of the life he had walked away from. The cafe was called The Weary Traveller, which was either profound marketing or accidental honesty. Its proprietor, a Mulgrath named Birtwick, who stood roughly 4 feet tall and resembled nothing so much as an ambulatory mushroom with opinions, had inherited it from his aunt and spent most of his time complaining about the inheritance tax implications while simultaneously refusing to sell. Breno had been coming here for 6 years. In all that time, Birtwick had never once gotten his order right, but he had also never once asked Breno any personal questions, which made him the closest thing Breno had to a friend on this station. "Your eggs," Birtwick announced, sliding a plate across the table with 3 of his stubby arm stalks. The eggs were green. They were always green. Breno had stopped asking why. "These look worse than usual. The printer is having an existential crisis." Birtwick's voice emerged from somewhere in his cap-like head, a resonant baritone that seemed anatomically improbable. "It keeps trying to make everything taste like regret." "Sounds about right." Birtwick made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a spore discharge and shuffled back toward the counter. The cafe was quiet today. A pair of Thessian traders occupied the corner booth, their antennae twitching as they negotiated something in their clicking native tongue. Near the door, a Scalian mercenary, scales the color of old copper, eyes like black marbles, nursed something that smoked faintly and occasionally tried to crawl out of its glass. And at the counter, one of those grey-skinned Volmari tourists sat hunched over a data tablet, enormous eyes reflecting the blue glow of whatever passed for entertainment on his homeworld. Breno poked at his green eggs and thought about nothing in particular, which was precisely the way he liked his mornings. That was when the door chimed, and everything changed. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed, small and blue, and walking with the particular determination of someone who had not yet learned that the universe rarely cooperated with determination. Her skin was the color of a clear sky at twilight, shading to deeper indigo around her pointed ears and the delicate membrane-thin appendages that folded against her back like miniature wings. Her hair was the pale cyan of glacial ice, cut short and sticking up in approximately 17 different directions, suggesting either a strong aesthetic commitment or a recent fight with a pillow. Corvani. That was the species name, though humans had started calling them dragons about 40 years back when the first diplomatic missions made contact. Something about the wing-like structures and the way their eyes caught the light. The nickname had stuck despite being anatomically inaccurate. Corvani could not actually fly, at least not without mechanical assistance, and they breathed perfectly ordinary air rather than fire. But humans had never been particularly good at letting facts interfere with a catchy name. The girl could not have been more than 5 standard years old, which meant she should not have been walking through a cafe on a frontier station by herself. Breno frowned, looking past her toward the door, expecting a parent to follow. No one did. She walked directly to his booth, with footsteps that lit up briefly with each impact, some kind of illuminated sneakers, the cheap kind they sold at the station's market district, and stopped exactly 2 feet from his table. In her arms, clutched with the fierce protectiveness that children reserved for their most treasured possessions, she held a mechanical rabbit. or what had once been a mechanical rabbit. Now it was mostly a collection of exposed circuits, dangling servo wires, and one ear that hung at an angle suggesting recent trauma. The rabbit's single functioning eye blinked up at Breno with what he could only describe as existential exhaustion. "Mr. Human," the girl said. Her voice was high and clear, with the slight harmonic resonance that made Corvani's speech sound like it was being accompanied by a very small, very distant orchestra. "Could you fix my little robot?" Breno stared at her. "I'm sorry." "Hopper is broken." She held up the rabbit as evidence. "His ear stopped working and now he won't play the messages anymore. And I tried to fix him, but I made it worse. And Mama says we cannot afford the repair shop and—" She paused, took a breath, and added with devastating simplicity, "He was Dragon Papa's last gift, before Dragon Papa went to the stars and did not come back." The silence that followed felt like it lasted approximately forever. Breno was aware, in some distant part of his brain, that the Thessian traders had stopped their negotiations to watch, that Birtwick had paused mid-polish of a glass that had not been clean in approximately a decade, that even the Scalian mercenaries' drink had stopped trying to escape, as if the entire café had collectively decided to observe this moment. "I'm not a repair technician," Breno said finally, "but you fix things." The girl pointed at the patches on his jacket. "You have the fixing symbols." He glanced down at his worn flight suit, at the faded insignia that marked him as a certified salvage operator. Technically, she was not wrong. Salvage work involved fixing things. It also involved finding things, breaking things, occasionally exploding things, and once memorably negotiating with a ship's AI that had developed a gambling addiction. But mechanical rabbit repair had not been on his licensing exam. "That's not really the same." "Please." The girl's eyes were enormous, the irises a deep violet that seemed to contain entire galaxies of hope. "Hopper is the only way I can hear Dragon Papa's voice anymore." And there it was, the sentence that cut through 17 years of carefully constructed emotional fortification like a plasma cutter through hull plating. Breno thought about his own father, about the last conversation they had shared 22 years ago, when he had told Admiral Wendell Dunn that he would not be following in his footsteps, would not be joining the coalition fleet, would not be continuing the 4-generation tradition of Dunns in uniform. He thought about the silence that had followed, thick and cold as the void between stars, about all the years since, when they had exchanged nothing but formal communications and the occasional birthday notification that arrived with the warmth of a tax document. He thought about what it might mean to have a voice preserved, even in a broken mechanical rabbit, and to be terrified of losing it forever. "Sit down," he heard himself say. The girl's face transformed into something incandescent. She scrambled into the booth across from him with the graceless enthusiasm of a small creature who had not yet learned to be self-conscious about joy. Her wing appendages fluttered briefly, an involuntary expression of happiness if Breno remembered his xenobiology correctly. "I am Tessely," she announced, placing Hopper on the table between them with ceremonial care. "But everyone calls me Tess, because Tessely is 3 syllables, and 3 syllables is a lot when you are in a hurry." Breno: "That is also 3 syllables. I'm rarely in a hurry." Tess considered this with the gravity of a philosopher evaluating a new theorem. "That is probably wise. Mama says rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to consequences, and consequences lead to paperwork. Your mother sounds like a smart woman. She's the smartest." This was stated with absolute certainty, the kind of faith that only children could maintain before the universe got around to teaching them about complexity. She knows all the names of all the stars in the Corvani charts, and she can calculate jump trajectories in her head, and she makes the best morning cakes even when the food printer is being difficult. "Speaking of your mother," Breno leaned back, studying the girl. "Does she know you're here?" A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or the Corvani equivalent, passed across Tess's blue features. "She is at work. She has 3 jobs, the morning job and the afternoon job and the night job." The night job is why I stay with Mrs. Pemberton, who smells like old flowers and falls asleep during the educational programs. And does Mrs. Pemberton know you're here? She thinks I'm in the refresher. Tess's wing appendages flattened slightly. The refresher visit is taking longer than usual. I may need to return soon before she sends a search party. A search party seems likely, yes. But I needed to find someone who could fix Hopper. The girl's voice rose with distress. And Mama said we cannot afford repairs. And Mrs. Pemberton said maybe I should just get a new toy. But Hopper is not just a toy. Hopper has Dragon Papa's voice inside. And if Hopper breaks forever, then Dragon Papa's voice breaks forever, and then... She stopped. Her lower lip trembled in that particular way that preceded childhood tears. Breno, who had faced down malfunctioning reactor cores and hostile territorial claims and one particularly aggressive customs official on Sigma Station, found himself completely unprepared for this development. "All right," he said quickly. "All right, let me look at him." He picked up the mechanical rabbit, turning it over in his hands. The construction was decent, not high-end, but solid middle-market work from one of the Kovani artisan shops, the kind of thing a working-class family might save up for, purchase with pride, gift to a beloved daughter. The damage was extensive but not catastrophic. The loose ear was a simple servo connection. The exposed wiring looked worse than it was. The real issue, he suspected, was in the memory core housing, which had been opened and then closed incorrectly, probably during the girl's attempted repair. "You tried to fix the message playback yourself," he said. Tess nodded miserably. "I watched a tutorial on the station network. It said, easy repair for beginners, but I think the tutorial was lying." "Tutorials often do." Breno found himself almost smiling. "The message core is still intact. It's just been disconnected from the main processor. That's actually good news." "Good news!" Hope flooded back into those enormous violet eyes. "Means the voice recordings are still in there. They just can't get out right now. Can you get them out? I'll need some tools, and better light than this place offers." He glanced around the cafe. Birtwick was watching with undisguised interest, which for a Mulgrath meant his cap had turned slightly in their direction. "I have a workshop back at my quarters. If your mother agrees, I could take a look at it properly." "But Mama is at work until—" The cafe door chimed again. The woman who entered moved like someone who'd been running for a very long time and had only just forced herself to stop. She was tall for a Corvani, with the same twilight blue skin as her daughter, but features that had sharpened with age and worry into something elegant rather than soft. Her hair was a deeper shade of cyan, pulled back in a practical arrangement that suggested efficiency over vanity. She wore the uniform of the station's logistics division, the kind of job that paid just enough to survive and never quite enough to get ahead. Her eyes, the same violet as her daughter's, but containing considerably more exhaustion, swept the cafe and locked onto Tess with an expression that mixed relief and exasperation in approximately equal measure. "Tessalivan Corrales," she said, and the three names landed like verdicts from a particularly disappointed judge. "What did I tell you about leaving Mrs. Pemberton's quarters?" "Uju." Tess shrank slightly in the booth. "That I should not do it." "And what did you do?" "The opposite of that." The woman crossed to the booth in 4 long strides, her gaze flicking briefly to Breno before returning to her daughter. "I received a communication from Mrs. Pemberton approximately 3 minutes into my shift, saying you had vanished into the station. Do you have any idea how terrified I was? Do you have any concept of what could happen to a small child alone on a frontier waypoint?" "I was not alone. I was with Mr. Breno." Tess gestured at him with the confidence of someone presenting a very strong legal defense. "He is going to fix Hopper." The woman's expression shifted, became harder to read. She turned to look at Breno fully for the first time, taking in the worn flight suit, the grey-streaked hair, the face that bore the particular weathering of someone who had spent decades in deep space. He could see her calculating, evaluating, trying to determine what kind of threat he might represent. "I apologize for my daughter," she said finally. Her voice was controlled, careful, She has a tendency to approach strangers when she wants something badly enough. I hope she has not imposed on you. She asked me to fix a toy. Breno set Hopper on the table. I was just explaining that I'd need proper tools to do it right. Something flickered in the woman's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. We cannot afford. I didn't ask for payment. Silence stretched between them. In the background, Birtwick had given up all pretense of not eavesdropping and was now openly watching while polishing the same glass he had been working on for the past 15 minutes. I don't accept charity, the woman said. Good, because I'm not offering any. Breno folded his arms. I'm offering to fix a mechanical rabbit because a child asked nicely and because the alternative is going back to eating green eggs and feeling sorry for myself. If that arrangement offends your dignity, feel free to decline. But the kid says there are voice recordings in this thing, messages from her father. And speaking as someone who has spent 22 years regretting words I never got to say to my own family, I would rather help preserve a voice than watch it get lost because of pride. He had not meant to say that much. The words had simply emerged, bypassing all the usual filters he maintained between his thoughts and his mouth. The woman stared at him. Tess looked between them with the particular intensity of a child watching adults navigate something incomprehensible. I am Solara, the woman said finally. Her voice had softened slightly. Solara Van Corrales. And I suppose if you are determined to help, the least I can do is not stand in your way. Breno Dunn. He extended his hand, remembered belatedly that Corvani greetings involved a different gesture, and ended up doing something awkward that was half handshake and half wave. Solara's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. You are not practiced in our customs, Mr. Dunn. I'm not practiced in most customs. Ask anyone on this station. Perhaps I will. She turned to her daughter. Tess, we need to return you to Mrs. Pemberton's care. I have 4 more hours of my shift, and I cannot— Actually, Birtwick interrupted, shuffling over with the casual timing of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. I could use some help in the kitchen. Young Tessely could assist with inventory, counting things. Very educational. Also keeps her out of trouble and under adult supervision while her mother works. Solara looked at the Molgrath with visible suspicion. You would do this? For strangers? For regular customers who tip adequately and do not complain about the eggs. Birtwick made that spore discharge sound again. Also, I find human drama exhausting and would prefer this situation resolve itself quickly so my café can return to its normal state of comfortable misery. He's charming, Breno observed dryly. I am a realist. Birtwick extended an armstalk toward Tess. Come, small dragon child. You will learn the ancient art of counting protein containers. It is exactly as exciting as it sounds. Tess looked at her mother, eyes pleading. Solara sighed, the particular sigh of a parent who recognized she was outnumbered by circumstances. Fine. But you will behave, and you will not wander off again. And when I return after my shift, we will have a conversation about choices and consequences. Yes, Mama! Tess scrambled out of the booth, paused and turned back to Breno. You will fix Hopper, you promise? Breno looked at the mechanical rabbit with its dangling ear and exhausted eye. He thought about promises, about how easy they were to make and how difficult they were to keep, about all the promises he had broken over the years to himself and others. I'll do my best, he said. It was not quite a promise, but it was the most honest thing he could offer. Tess seemed to accept it. She nodded solemnly, then followed Birtwick toward the kitchen, with her glowing sneakers leaving brief trails of light across the cafe floor. Solara watched her go, then turned back to Breno. You do not have to do this. I know. I cannot repay you. I know that too. Then why? Breno picked up Hopper, felt the weight of circuits and memories and a dead man's voice waiting to be freed. Because somewhere in the universe, there's probably someone I should have helped and didn't. Consider this an attempt to balance the accounts. Solara studied him for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for in his face, she seemed to find it, because eventually she nodded. I finish work at 1900 station time. We could meet then, perhaps, discuss the repair. The weary traveler serves what it claims is dinner. I have eaten here before. A ghost of a smile crossed her features. The claims are optimistic. That's one word for it. She gathered herself to leave, straightened her uniform, became once again the picture of professional composure. But at the door, she paused. Mr. Dunn, her father, my husband, died 3 years ago. A cargo transport accident in the Kesselrhine belt. The company said it was a navigation error. Joval was the best navigator I ever knew. She swallowed. Hopper was the last thing he gave her before that final run. She has played those recordings every night since. They are all she has left of his voice. I understand. I hope you do. She held his gaze. Because if you get that child's hopes up and then fail to deliver, I will make your life very uncomfortable in ways you cannot currently imagine. Fair enough. She left. The door chimed behind her, and Breno sat alone in his booth, holding a broken mechanical rabbit, wondering what in the 17 hells he had just gotten himself into. The answer, as it turned out, was quite a lot. His workshop was technically a converted storage unit in the residential section of Waypoint 17, which meant it was approximately the size of a generous coffin and contained more equipment than was strictly advisable for such a space. Breno had accumulated tools the way some people accumulated regrets, steadily, inevitably, and with no clear plan for what to do with them all. He cleared a space on his workbench, set up the magnification lamp, and began the delicate process of opening Hopper's housing without causing additional damage. The rabbit's single functioning eye tracked his movements with what seemed like nervous anticipation. "Hold still," Breno muttered. The eye blinked. That wasn't a question. He worked methodically, documenting each step with his personal recorder in case he needed to retrace his actions. The ear servo was indeed a simple fix, a reconnection of 2 leads that had been jarred loose, probably from a drop. The exposed wiring required careful rerouting and some new insulation, but the real work was in the memory core housing. Tess's repair attempt, while well-intentioned, had managed to disconnect the core's primary data bus and partially corrupt the playback buffer. Not catastrophically, but enough to prevent normal operation. Breno spent 3 hours carefully rebuilding the connections, using techniques he had learned decades ago during his brief stint as a maintenance tech on a freight carrier. By hour 4, his back ached, his eyes burned, and he was intimately familiar with every circuit pathway in a Corvani-manufactured companion unit. But when he finally reconnected the power supply and pressed the playback activation, a voice emerged from Hopper's speaker. "And remember, little Starshine, no matter how far the rockets go, they always come back home, because home isn't a place. Home is wherever the people who love you are waiting, and I will always be waiting for you, even when—" The recording ended. Breno sat very still. He had not expected it to hit so hard. It was just a voice, a stranger's voice, belonging to a man he had never met, saying words intended for a daughter he had only just encountered. But something in the tone, in the gentle certainty of a parent's love, reached through his carefully maintained defenses and grabbed hold of something he had buried years ago. He thought about his own father, about the voice that had never said, "I love you." Because Admiral Wendell Dunn believed such declarations were undisciplined, about the silence that had grown between them like a cancer year after year, until it became easier to maintain the distance than to bridge it. Had there ever been recordings like this? Had his father ever spoken words of affection into a device meant for Breno alone? The answer, he suspected, was no. But maybe it was not too late to create such moments. Maybe some silences could still be broken. He finished the repairs, tested all systems, and watched as Hopper's ears straightened as both eyes lit up with the warm amber glow of a properly functioning companion unit. The rabbit seemed almost grateful. "You're welcome," Breno told it. Hopper's nose twitched. At 1900 station time, Solara arrived at the weary traveler with Tess in tow. The girl spotted Hopper immediately. Breno had placed the repaired rabbit on the table like a trophy, and her squeal of joy probably violated several noise ordinances. "Hopper, you fixed him! Mr. Breno, you fixed him!" She threw herself into the booth and gathered the rabbit into her arms, pressing her face against its fur. Hopper's eyes glowed softly. After a moment, its speaker crackled to life. "Good evening, Tessalee. I have missed you. Would you like to hear a message from your father?" Tess nodded, tears already streaming down her blue cheeks. The voice emerged again, that same gentle, loving tone Breno had heard in his workshop. Joval Corrales, speaking to his daughter across the unbridgeable distance of death, saying things that mattered in all the ways that mattered most. Solara stood frozen by the table, one hand pressed to her mouth. Her eyes glistened. Breno suddenly felt like an intruder, in a moment too intimate for strangers. He started to rise, to give them privacy, but Solara's hand caught his wrist. "Stay," she said softly. "Please. You gave us this. You should see what it means." So he stayed, and he watched as a little blue-skinned girl held a mechanical rabbit and heard her dead father's voice, and he thought about all the voices that had been lost to silence, his own included, and he wondered if maybe it was not too late to change some things. What happened next was both unexpected and inevitable. Tess began asking for Breno by name. "Can we visit Mr. Breno?" It became a regular refrain, followed by "Mr. Breno knows how to fix things," and "Mr. Breno tells good stories, even though he pretends he doesn't." Solara resisted at first, concerned about imposing, but Breno found himself genuinely enjoying the company. He started meeting them on his free days, watching Tess while Solara worked her overlapping shifts, taking the girl to the station's observation deck to watch ships come and go, answering her endless questions about space travel and machinery and why humans only had boring skin colors instead of pretty blue ones. "We're not boring," he protested once. "We come in different shades." "Shades of boring," Tess replied confidently. He could not argue with that. Solara joined them when she could, which was less often than any of them wanted, but more often than Breno had experienced companionship in years. They talked about everything and nothing. Her work frustrations, his salvage stories, the particular challenges of raising a child alone on a frontier station. She told him about Joval, about their courtship during her years at the Navigation Academy, about the way he had proposed during a meteor shower, visible from the Corvani homeworld, about the quiet devastation that had followed the accident. He told her about his father, about the Admiral, about the expectations he had failed to meet and the price of that failure. "Do you miss him?" she asked one evening, after Tess had fallen asleep in the Café booth with Hopper clutched in her arms. Breno considered the question. "I miss who I thought he could be, who I wanted him to be. I'm not sure I ever knew who he actually was. Perhaps you could find out. It's been 22 years. "So?" Solara's violet eyes met his. "On my world, we say that distance is measured in intentions, not time. If you intend to close the distance, 22 years is nothing. If you intend to maintain it, 22 seconds is eternity." He thought about that for a long time after she left. 4 months after the day Tess walked into the weary traveler, Breno received a communication from Coalition Fleet Command. The message was brief, official, and addressed to Breno W. Dunn, formerly of Cargo Operations Division. It informed him that Admiral Wendell Dunn, retired, was seeking to establish contact. A response was requested at his earliest convenience. Breno stared at the message for approximately 3 hours. He had imagined this moment countless times over the years, his father reaching out, breaking the silence, attempting reconciliation. In his fantasies, he had responded with everything from gracious acceptance to bitter rejection. He had drafted imaginary letters filled with accusations and forgiveness in equal measure. He had practiced conversations in his head, preparing arguments and counter-arguments for debates that never came. Now that it was real, he had no idea what to do. "What does it say?" Tess asked. She had developed an uncanny ability to appear exactly when interesting things were happening. "It's private." "Oh, private things are usually the most interesting." "That's disturbingly accurate." He closed the message. "It's from my father. He wants to talk." Tess's wing appendages perked up with interest. "Is that good or bad?" "I genuinely don't know. When I don't know if something is good or bad, Mama says I should try it and find out, unless it involves the airlock controls." Those I should never try. Sound advice on both counts. He did not respond to the message that day, or the next, but he thought about it constantly, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. Solara found him on the observation deck 2 days later, staring out at the stars. "Tess told me," she said, settling beside him, "about the communication from your father. The kid has no concept of confidentiality. She is 5. The concept comes later." Solara was quiet for a moment. "What will you do?" "I don't know. It's been so long. What could we possibly say to each other?" "Perhaps that's what you need to find out." He turned to look at her. In the starlight, her blue skin seemed to glow faintly, and her eyes held the kind of patient wisdom that only came from surviving loss. "On your world," he said, "what do you do when someone breaks your trust so completely that you're not sure it can ever be rebuilt?" "We begin anyway." Solara reached over and took his hand, a human gesture she had learned specifically for him. "Rebuilding is not about certainty. It is about willingness to try despite uncertainty. Your father has taken the first step by reaching out. The question is whether you are willing to take the second. What if he hurts me again? Then you will hurt, and you will survive it, and you will know that at least you tried." She squeezed his fingers. "But what if he doesn't? What if this is the beginning of something you both need? Can you afford to miss that chance because you are afraid of the alternative?" Breno sat with those words for a long time. The next morning, he sent a response. 3 weeks later, Admiral Wendell Dunn arrived at Waypoint 17. He was older than Breno remembered, which was obvious, given that everyone was older than they had been 22 years ago. But somehow the Admiral had always seemed ageless in Breno's memory, fixed, immutable. A monument rather than a man. The reality was different. Wendell Dunn, at 78, moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing pain. His once rigid posture had softened, his silver hair had thinned. He walked with a cane, not for show, but for necessity. They met in a private lounge near the docking ring. Neutral territory, neither man spoke for the first several minutes. Finally, the Admiral said, "You look well. You look old." A flicker of something crossed his father's face. Surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of amusement. "Fair enough." More silence. "I did not expect you to come in person," Breno said. "A communication seemed insufficient. Some conversations require presence, and after 22 years, you suddenly decided this was such a conversation." The Admiral's jaw tightened. For a moment, Breno saw the man he remembered, all discipline and distance and unyielding expectation. But then something shifted. "I received a medical diagnosis," Wendell said quietly. 6 months ago. They give me perhaps 2 years, perhaps less. Long enough to settle affairs, short enough to reconsider priorities. Breno felt the news like a punch to the chest. "You're dying." "Everyone is dying, Breno. I merely have a more specific timeline than most." That's a hell of a way to phrase it. "Would you prefer euphemisms?" "I'd prefer you had told me sooner." "I am telling you now." The Admiral met his eyes. "I have spent a significant portion of my life being wrong about important things. I was wrong about what it meant to be strong. I was wrong about what love required. I was wrong to let silence become easier than the effort of connection." He paused. "I was wrong about you." The words hung in the air between them. "You built something," Wendell continued. "Away from the fleet, away from the name, away from everything I believed mattered. And what you built is good, honest, real. I have watched from a distance. I have read reports. I know about your work, about the lives you have saved during salvage operations, about the reputation you have earned for integrity in a profession not known for it. You spied on me. I maintained awareness. It was the only way I knew to stay connected when I lacked the courage for actual connection." Breno opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." The Admiral's voice was surprisingly gentle. "I want nothing from you. I came to give something to you if you will accept it." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small item. "This belonged to your mother. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready for it. I decided that readiness was for you to determine, not me. I simply never had the courage to deliver it." He held out a ring, simple silver with a single blue stone. "She wore it the day we met," Wendell said. "She always said it brought her luck. When she died, she made me promise it would go to someone you loved, whenever you found them." Breno stared at the ring. His mother had been gone for 31 years, a brain hemorrhage, sudden and merciless, and he had almost no memory of her. But he remembered stories. He remembered photographs. He remembered the way his father's face would close whenever she was mentioned, the grief transmuted into silence because it was easier than tears. "I don't," his voice cracked. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." The Admiral pressed the ring into his hand. "I have made many mistakes, Breno. I cannot undo them. I can only acknowledge them and ask whether you are willing to let me spend whatever time I have left trying to do better." Outside the lounge windows, ships came and went, lives in transit, stories in motion. Breno thought about all the years of silence, all the words unspoken, all the opportunities lost to pride and pain, and the peculiar stubbornness that seemed to run in the Dunn bloodline. He thought about Solara, who had taught him that distance was measured in intentions. He thought about Tess, who believed that trying was better than never knowing. He thought about a mechanical rabbit and a dead man's voice, and the importance of preserving what mattered before it was too late. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said finally. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance." Breno looked at his father, really looked, and saw for the first time not the Admiral, not the monument, but the man, flawed, frightened, hoping for something he had no right to expect, just like Breno himself. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said. The dinner at the Weary Traveller was, by most objective standards, a disaster. Birtwick's food printer had chosen that specific evening to enter what he described as an aggressive experimental phase, resulting in dishes that bore no relationship to anything that had been ordered. The Thessian traders got into a heated argument that involved thrown beverages. The Scalian mercenaries' drink actually succeeded in escaping and had to be chased down by the kitchen staff. And Admiral Wendell Dunn, retired Coalition fleet commander, decorated war hero, and generally intimidating presence, spent the entire meal being interrogated by a 5-year-old Corvani girl about his opinions on mechanical rabbits, the ethical implications of boring human skin colors, and whether he had ever met any real space pirates, not the pretend ones from the educational programs. "I encountered pirates on 3 occasions during my career," Wendell replied gravely. "They were significantly less romantic than entertainment suggests." "That is disappointing," Tess said. "Reality often is." Solara watched the exchange with barely concealed amusement. Breno watched his father interact with a child for what might have been the first time in decades, and felt something shift in his chest, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first tentative step toward it. After dinner, Tess fell asleep against Solara's side, Hopper clutched in her arms. The mechanical rabbit's eyes glowed softly, keeping patient watch. "She's remarkable," Wendell said quietly. "They both are." "Yes. And the mother? The Corvani woman?" "Solara." Breno glanced at her across the table. She's everything I didn't know I was missing." "I see." "Oh," the Admiral was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would have liked her. She always said you needed someone who would challenge you, not someone who would simply agree with you." "I don't remember her saying that." "You were 4 when she died. There is much you don't remember." Wendell's hand moved unconsciously to his coat, where the ring had been. "She was extraordinary. Strong in ways I never managed to be. She would have been proud of you." "Would she?" "Without question." The Admiral met his eyes. "And so am I, for whatever that is worth." The words landed softly, like snow settling on ground that had been frozen for too long. "It's worth something," Breno admitted. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something that might eventually grow into it." Solara woke slightly at the silence, her violet eyes finding Breno's. He smiled at her, something that had become easier over the months, and she smiled back. Outside the cafe windows, the manufactured rain had stopped. Beyond the viewport, Krellis Minor hung in the void, its orange glow painting the station in amber light. Ships departed and arrived. Lives continued their complicated trajectories, and in a small cafe on a frontier waypoint, 3 generations of broken things began, slowly, to mend. 6 months later, on a clear day when the station's atmospheric processors had decided to give everyone a break from precipitation, Breno asked Solara to marry him. They were on the observation deck, their place, now watching a convoy of cargo haulers make the jump to faster than light. Tess was at school, learning mathematics and complaining about it via frequent messages to Hopper, who dutifully relayed her grievances. "I have something for you," Breno said. Solara raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "It's supposed to sound romantic. I may be doing this wrong." "The awareness of doing it wrong is endearing in its own way." He laughed, something else that had become easier, and pulled out the ring. His mother's ring. The blue stone caught the light from the viewport and seemed to glow from within. "This belonged to someone who was very good at love," he said. "Someone who died too young and left behind a family that never quite figured out how to manage without her. I barely remember her, but I know she would have wanted this to go to someone worthy of it, someone strong and kind and frustratingly wise." He met Solara's eyes. "Someone who taught me that distance is measured in intentions, and who has somehow convinced me against all evidence that starting over is always possible." Solara was crying. Corvani tears were darker than human ones, violet like her eyes, and they tracked down her blue cheeks like tiny rivers of twilight. "Is this a proposal?" she asked. "It's supposed to be. Am I still doing it wrong?" "Completely." "But?" She took the ring from his hand and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which was probably coincidence, but felt like something more. "But yes," she said, "yes, I will marry you, and yes, I will spend however many years we have teaching you how to do things less wrong. That could take a while. I am patient." He kissed her then, there on the observation deck with the stars wheeling slowly beyond the glass, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Breno Dunn felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The wedding was small, intimate, held in the cafe that had brought them together, with Birtwick catering despite everyone's better judgment. Admiral Wendell Dunn attended. He sat in the back row, leaning on his cane, watching his son exchange vows with a woman from a species he had never imagined being family. When Tess walked down the aisle, scattering flower petals and announcing to everyone that she was practicing being a flower distributor because it might be a good career, the old man actually smiled. Breno saw it, caught his father's eye across the room, and something passed between them, not forgiveness still, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. After the ceremony, after the dancing and the terrible food, and the moment when the Scalian mercenaries' new drink somehow ended up on the ceiling, Wendell approached his son. "I brought something," the Admiral said. He held out a box, old wood, polished with care, showing signs of age. Breno opened it. Inside was a model airplane, military grade, exactly like the one from his 10th birthday. The same markings, the same slight chip in the tail wing, now repaired with careful precision. "You kept it," Breno breathed. "You thought you lost it during a move. I found it. I have been keeping it for you, waiting for the right time to return it." Wendell's voice was rough. "I know I said don't break it. What I should have said was, I love you and I'm proud of you. I'm saying it now, 22 years late, but I'm saying it." Breno held the model plane, felt the weight of it, remembered being a boy who wanted desperately to be seen by a father who didn't know how to show affection. "Thank you," he said. It was not everything. It could never be everything. But it was enough. It was a start. That night, Breno lay awake in the small apartment that had become home, listening to Tess's soft breathing in the next room, feeling Solara's warmth beside him, thinking about all the broken things that could be mended if someone cared enough to try. The mechanical rabbit sat on the nightstand, ears perked, eyes glowing softly. A guardian of memories. a bridge between the living and the lost. "Dad would have liked it here," Tess had said earlier, during the reception, unprompted. "He always said, the best adventures were the ones where you found family you didn't expect." She was right, of course. Children usually were in the ways that mattered. Breno closed his eyes, listened to the quiet hum of the station around him, and let himself feel something he had almost forgotten how to identify. Peace. Not the absence of problems. There would always be problems, always challenges, always the messy complexity of life among the stars. But peace in the sense of knowing exactly where you belonged and who you belonged with. Peace in the sense of finally, after decades of wandering, coming home. Outside the viewport, the stars burned on. Ships came and went. The universe continued its indifferent rotation. But in one small corner of it, on a frontier station that smelled like synth coffee and possibility, a family that should never have existed was learning to love each other. And that, in the end, was the only story that really mattered.